So just in terms of what they are, as I'm sure every school child in Bangor knows, or at least should know, there are two kinds of bells that were used in early Ireland. Those made of cast bronze, and those made of sheet iron, and those made of cast bronze. Cast bronze being the type to which the Bangor bell belongs, but the sheet iron bells are the earlier ones. And of course, as everyone knows, these are quadrangular bells. They have four surfaces. So they're symmetrical, they have two faces and they have two sides. And as you can see on the screen, if you can see it from the back, that's your typical pairing of an iron and a bronze bell. And the quadrangular shape is completely clear, particularly when you look into the interior view. You can see there's a certain rounding of the angles, all right, but basically these are quadrangular. And the iron bells always have a loop inside, which you can see in the case of this bell from Inishmurray, a loop inside to suspend a clapper. So they always were provided with a clapper from the word go. The bronze bell on the right of the image has had the clapper fitted. It's a secondary insertion, but there was always a clapper there. Now, we can say a whole lot about these things because we have a wealth of evidence besides the material evidence that the bells themselves provide. So we can contextualize them by reference to a whole raft of information. But first of all, to note their numbers, that there are something like 50 surviving iron bells and 30 of bronze, which is an extraordinary number considering the age of these things. And the age, I should emphasize, is the early medieval period, that is the pre-Norman age in Ireland. So we're talking about material that was made from the 5th or 6th century, I think, certainly until the 12th. So we have a very long chronology of bell making, but the point to note is, and the 19th century antiquaries reached the conclusion long before anyone today, that the iron bells are the older kind, and there's no reason to dispute that. They are the first kind of hand bell that were used, and bronze bells came along later, and I'll come back to that point. But we have, besides the large numbers of these things, which is so striking, we also have the vital documentation that puts the use of the bells into context, so that it's not as though these were dozens of anonymous bells and we were wondering were they animal bells or what, or somehow secular in their context, but they're not. They're ecclesiastical bells. There's no doubt about that. And we know because we have, for example, the early life of St. Columba, written by Agamemnon of Iona around the year 700, and he, for example, talks just incidentally about the bell being as part of the monastic regime, as part of timekeeping, so an accessory to the monastic life. And what's on the screen, and what's on the screen at the moment, is just another accessory to the monastic life, which is of course the sundial. And we have a sundial here on the terrace up in front of the castle, and this is an emblem on the screen, so that the bell and the sundial together are twin accessories of monastic timekeeping. But of course the bell is much more universal in its application because the sundial needs the sun to shine. But we also have iconography to put the bells in context for us, and here's an example from Killadece in County Fermanagh, a figure walking, holding a bell and crozier. I hope you can make that out. He's to be understood, I think, as a guardian figure. He's perhaps the founder of the place. He marked out the sanctum of the church originally with his crozier by ringing his bell, and this is an image to perpetuate that action so that he's a permanent guardian figure. He was set up again, the stone was sort of found lying flat sometime in the 30s or 40s and was re-erected in a concrete base. He's facing the wrong way because he should be walking sunwise, which is the auspicious way to walk around the church site, but he's actually walking widdershins, as we would say, which is the wrong way, but we can forgive them that little mistake. And from White Island, we have this figure very different because it's a static figure, as though holding up these two emblems, which might well have been trophies that were held within the church for pilgrims to come and see. This could be outside advertising in the form of a stone statue. So one standing figure and then the walking figure of Killadece. But certainly they're putting the bell firmly in a very formal ecclesiastical context. That's the two together. You see how different they are. But of course, within the county, and we'll come back to Fermanagh representations later, We have also the evidence, in order to contextualize these things, we have the evidence of their distribution. And if you can make that out, it's a lot of small symbols on the map, but maybe you'll be able to see where the dots are mainly concentrating. This is the distribution of iron bells, and our iron bells are largely concentrated in the Midland counties of Ireland. So that's County Offaly, County Westmeath, North County Tip. Now, there is a goodly enough showing across the north of Ireland, and we can populate the north further with 4 more symbols, which are bells that John Bell, the famous John Bell in Dungannon, who taught in the Royal School. He was a great collector in the 19th century. He had 4 iron bells we can't localise, so we need to pepper them in somewhere on the map. So there's a decent showing of iron bells right across Ulster, but as I say, the concentration remains in the Midlands, and South Munster, South Leinster are largely blank for whatever reason. And when we look at bronze bells, and we can maybe again make out there's a cluster in the north, County Tyrone. Not that the counties matter, but County Tyrone has more bronze bells than any other county, and most counties have none at all. So the bronze bells are an Ulster phenomenon, and particularly mid-Ulster. There's a scattering down further south, but 1 or 2 of those are even questionable as to whether they're ancient locations for these bells or not, particularly one little dot there for Bray in County Wicklow, which is a bell in the Hunt collection in Limerick. I'm very suspicious of that as the true provenance. So the bells then are a really mid-Ulster phenomenon. And we put the 2 together again, it's maybe even harder to see at this scale, but it's quite a striking contrast. And I think that this helps to contextualize and bear out other evidence that we have, which is that the iron bells are the accessory of monastic living, and the bronze bells are not. The bronze bells come along later, so that the iron bells came into use as an accessory of monastic life, and were used from the time of Patrick in the 5th century onwards, and maybe made until about the 10th century. But in that period, bronze bells started to be made, but they weren't made for monastic houses, I feel. I think they were made for what we would today call parish churches. And so we find they're all in the vicinity of Armagh, the hinterland of Armagh, the great primatial church of Ireland, with its amazing resources in terms of metalworking skill, calligraphy, sculpture, you name it, because it was the primatial church. I think they were the patrons of the first makers of bronze bells, and they were farming these bronze bells out to what we would today call parish churches. So we're finding them cropping up at small places, the likes of Drumrah beside Omagh, or Tullyniskin beside Newmills, or Donaghmore, Ballyclog near Stewartstown. These are not great monastic houses, but we meet them later on as parish churches, and I think that's what they were at the time the bells were made in the 8th or 9th century. That, I think, is probably the context. Sorry. And it's when we look at the making of these iron bells, we can see they're the ones that can be the story can be carried back, because from the Roman provinces we're finding iron bells that are made in exactly the same way. So what's on the screen is a schematic representation of making an iron bell out of sheet iron, which is, hope you can make it out, beating out a flat sheet to a uniform thickness and consistency of thickness and composition, because it has to be forged out on the anvil. It's one sheet, as I say, then has to be cut to shape and then folded, and it has to be riveted up the 2 sides, and then brazed externally and internally to seal the joints and also to preserve it from rust. And this was done in the Roman provinces in the early centuries AD, and the Roman provinces include Roman Britain, and the bells were always made like this. This is a schematic rendering of an Irish bell being made, but the same thing applied to the likes of this one, which is from Eastern France, from 5th century context. And these are Gallo-Roman bells that are for all the world like the Irish ones, except they're smaller. So the only thing the monastic communities did to adapt these iron bells to their own purpose was to enlarge them, but the technology is essentially the same. And we, as I say, we have these bells in Roman Britain, a few of them, including in Wales and from Hadrian's Wall and Carlisle. As I say, they're very small, but the technology is the same. So that I think if the adaptation happened to monastic use in these islands, it happened in Britain, and I think it probably happened in what we would now call Wales, because Someone, for example, like St. David was regarded as one of the great father figures, and later Irish tradition remembered people like David as exemplary figures from whom the Irish had learned. So I think it was Irish monastic teachers copying learning from British ones who brought the bells into Ireland first. There were bells on the continent among these religious houses, but they were not quadrangular or made of iron. They don't survive in the name, but the hints we have is the continent didn't know this kind of bell in monastic houses. So it's an insular thing, began in Britain and came into Ireland. So it seems to me. And there's your comparable one. This might as well be from the 5th century hoard in eastern France, the technology being the same. And then there's your typical bronze bell, smaller, slimmer than the Bangor bell, and very typical of what I think Armagh was producing in maybe the 8th and into the 9th centuries. Now, we find as well, I seem to have skipped over without noticing a slide where I had an image from Abertnon's Life of Columba, where he contextualizes the bell for us, where the bell is called clocka and it's rung at midnight. But that is showing us the bell in a prosaic context in the monastic house. Whereas we find that the tradition of the bells snowballs, as it were, and they become associated with hallowed figures like St. Columba or Caldwell here in Bangor or any of them, that the bells became trophies of the saint. And as they became trophies, some of them were enshrined. And so we find two kinds of enshrinement. One I'm calling applied and the other I'm calling autonomous. And the applied shrines is like what's on the screen, where you're applying metal mounts permanently to the body of the bell, and then it can't be used as a bell anymore. It's sort of elevated to a new, non-utilitarian and purely ritual status. And then the other kind is this kind, the autonomous, which is basically a box. And St. Patrick's bell may well have been the first. These two shrines actually both made around 1100, but quite different. So I think St. Patrick's bell might be not just, it is our earliest surviving autonomous shrine, but it might also have been the first one that was ever made. And then other churches followed suit and copycatted the new Armagh style of making an autonomous shrine, because that meant then the bell could be taken out and used, and the shrine could meanwhile be somewhere else as a surrogate for the bell, which is the primary relic. So two for the price of one, as it were. And just one other thing worth mentioning in terms of this elevation of the bells and how they became so much part of the apparatus of the cults of saints. One great index of that is the naming that we have. So the bells, we can count up something like 60 or 70 proper names that were given to the bells. And these are pet names. They weren't formally conferred when the bells were made. They just arrived, as it were, spontaneously, organically within the tradition. Many of them are just describing colour or some sound quality of the bell. But a lot of them are linking the bell specifically with saints' names. And one of the combinations we get is the name Barnon meaning a gapped thing, a gapped bell, and that can be Barnon Fodric or Barnon X or Barnon Y, depending on which saint is connected. It means, as I say, a bell that's been damaged and has a gap in it that makes it distinctive. And my feeling is that Barnon might almost become a name of prestige, and so that people copycatting the cult of St. Patrick in Armagh thought to themselves, well, we better call our Saint's bell Barnon as well, because Patrick's bell has that name. And that just shows, that's some of my own photos, that just shows you the sliding little plate at the base of St. Patrick's bell shrine, so that you can put the bell in and take it out again. So there, that I hope contextualizes these things as I'm arguing, monastic in the first instance for the first several hundred years, then parochial, if you like, at the latter end as the bronze bells begin to be made. The whole thing then peters out in the 12th century. None of these bells are made anymore, but of course they are faithfully kept. And that's, I suppose, another point worth making. If anyone was passing by wondering what on earth are you talking about this morning, such a rarefied subject, why could this be important? Well, one of the reasons why it's important, not just the numbers that are involved, but it's the length of time that's involved, and also when we think about what's transmitted, not not thinking of what's found in the ground or what's dredged up out of rivers or lakes, but it's what is continuously transmitted from one generation to the next. That's a very special category of things. And when we consider that some of these iron bells were never lost and were handed down and were called the barnon of somebody or other, or the bell of Saint so-and-so, they were handed down with such care from one generation to the next. And if we carry that back to the 5th or 6th century, we might be talking 65 or 70 generations. So through all the wars and all the famines and all the changes, these things were still considered to be so important that they were the one thing that were guaranteed transmission. And so they've come down to us over such a length of time through so many hands of so many generations. That's one of the things that makes them so extraordinary. And this naming and this enshrining and the way they just became surrounded by so much vernacular tradition, this all bears out their importance. So the groundwork then all laid in the pre-Norman period, but the tradition